My name is Alice Carter, and I've lived in the same small town in New Jersey for most of my life. I'm 54 years old, and I've spent the majority of my career working as a financial director at a mid-sized accounting firm. To most people, accounting might seem dull or even tedious, but to me, it's been a calling. I've always had a sharp mind for numbers, and there's something deeply satisfying about taking a chaotic pile of receipts, invoices, and bank statements and turning it into something neat and orderly. For almost 3 decades, I've been trusted with that job, and it's a responsibility I've never taken lightly. When I first started at the firm, I was young, just out of college with big dreams. The early years were tough. I was an assistant, working my way up, learning the ropes. I remember staying late, poring over spreadsheets, making sure every decimal point was in place, never letting a mistake slip through. But over time, the hard work paid off. I moved up the ranks, first to senior accountant, then to assistant director, and finally, at the age of 40, I was promoted to financial director. At that point, I had earned the respect of my colleagues, and I had worked hard to build a reputation as someone who could be trusted. I was always the first one to volunteer for the tough assignments, and my work ethic was never questioned. I kept everything running smoothly: payroll, tax returns, quarterly reports. The firm had been in business for over 40 years, and I had been part of it for more than half of that time. My name, Alice Carter, became synonymous with integrity and reliability. If a financial statement had my signature on it, everyone knew it had been double-checked, triple-checked, and vetted. It wasn't just about the numbers, though. I took pride in being the steady force at the firm. The office was full of younger accountants and staff who came to me with questions, needing guidance. I was there for them, not just as a colleague, but as a mentor. I'd tell them that attention to detail was everything, that the tiniest mistake could lead to a disaster, and that reputation meant more than anything. In a field like ours, trust is everything. Outside of work, I didn't have much. My husband, Greg, and I had been together for 30 years. He was a good man, a mechanic with his own small shop. We didn't live a flashy life, but we were comfortable. Our daughter, Mia, had moved out a few years ago to start her own career in the city. She'd gone to college, and we were proud of her, but she was busy with her life, and we didn't see much of her anymore. Still, I was content. I had my work, my family, and my quiet life. Everything was stable. There were no surprises, no need for them. But of course, life has a way of throwing curveballs. I had no idea then, as I sat at my desk, going through the company's financial reports, that things were about to change, not just for me, but for everyone at the firm. In the blink of an eye, everything I had worked for would be shattered. But that's all in the future, and at this moment, in the quiet of my office, everything was still in its place. It all started the day a new director arrived at our firm. His name was Ethan Richards, and he was 38, young, ambitious, and incredibly confident. I had heard rumors in the office that the company had hired him to take over the leadership position, which, for years, had been more of a formality than an actual role. The firm had been doing fine under the previous management, and I had never thought we needed a big shakeup. But there was something about Ethan that immediately set him apart. When he walked into the office that first day, all polished in his sleek suit, I could sense an air of change. He introduced himself to everyone with a broad, easy smile, his handshake firm but not overbearing. The younger staff seemed to gravitate toward him almost instantly, excited by the prospect of someone new, someone who could bring fresh ideas and new opportunities. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about him. He was clearly smart and capable, but I was also used to being the one in charge, the one with all the answers. I wasn't sure if I trusted his sudden rise to power. Still, I had no reason to question his competence at that point. He was the boss now, and I was just an employee, albeit a long-standing one. What caught my attention, though, was how much he seemed to take an interest in me. From the very first week, Ethan started asking for my advice. He wanted to know how things were run, how the finances were organized, and how I had managed to keep the company on track for so long. He came into my office often, always with a smile and a compliment. "Alice, you've been an invaluable part of this company," he said once. "I've heard so much about your work, and I have to say, you've set a high standard here. I can't imagine running this place without your expertise." It was flattering, of course. I wasn't used to receiving compliments from anyone higher up the ladder. My hard work had always been rewarded with more responsibility, not praise. But there was something about Ethan's praise that felt different. It wasn't just professional admiration, it was personal, almost like he was paying a little too much attention to me. As the weeks went on, Ethan started to linger longer in my office, asking me to go over financial reports with him, offering to buy me lunch and making small talk. He would lean a little too close, his gaze a little too intense. I'm not a naive woman. I've been around long enough to recognize when someone's flirting. But at first, I told myself that maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe he was just a charismatic, outgoing guy who was trying to make a connection with the more seasoned members of the team. I convinced myself that there was nothing to worry about, even though a small part of me felt uncomfortable whenever he smiled at me with that glint in his eye. It wasn't just that, though. I started to notice how differently he treated me compared to the other employees. He was always complimenting my work, but he also made a point of telling me how much he appreciated my experience, something I hadn't heard anyone say in years. The younger staff were beginning to notice, too. They'd whisper behind my back about the attention I was getting from the boss. Some of them, I'm sure, were envious. Some of them were outright skeptical. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. Then came the day Ethan invited me out for a drink. It was supposed to be just the two of us. To talk shop, he'd said. It was casual enough. He'd mentioned that he was new to the area and thought it might be nice to get to know me outside of work. I almost declined. I was a little older than most of the staff, and after all, I had been married for over 30 years. Going out for drinks with my boss, no matter how harmless it might seem, didn't sit right with me. But there was that voice inside of me, the one that had always told me I needed to be a team player, to show that I could adapt to the changing dynamics of the workplace. So I agreed. We met at a bar in the city that evening, a cozy little place with dim lighting and jazz playing in the background. I was a little nervous, but I tried to shake it off. Ethan had already been there for a few minutes when I arrived, and he stood up to greet me with a smile. We talked about work, of course, but there was something else there, a familiarity in his tone, a sense of intimacy that had been absent in the office. As the night went on, he started to push the boundaries a little further. He complimented my appearance, something he'd never done before. "You know," he said with a mischievous grin, "I've always admired women who have the confidence to age gracefully. You're proof that experience only makes you better." I could feel my cheeks flush. It wasn't that I was offended necessarily, but it was a strange thing to hear from someone so much younger, and I wasn't sure how to react. At some point, the conversation turned away from work, and I found myself laughing a little too easily at his jokes, enjoying the attention. By the time the night ended, I had convinced myself that it was just a harmless evening out with my boss. Nothing more. After all, he was younger, ambitious, and probably just trying to get in good with the senior employees. But the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. The line between professional admiration and something else had started to blur, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to acknowledge it. As I walked back to my car, I had a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. But at that point, it didn't matter. Ethan was my boss, and I was just doing my job. What could go wrong? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan continued to make his presence felt in the office, but he began to focus more and more on me. At first, I thought I could just brush it off. After all, he was the boss, and it wasn't unusual for someone in his position to try to form connections with key employees. But slowly, it became clear that it wasn't just about professional rapport. There was something else at play. He'd stop by my office almost every day, asking me for advice, seeking my opinion on financial matters. Even though I'd been with the company for years, Ethan made a point of highlighting my expertise in front of the staff. Alice has been here for almost 3 decades, he'd say. She knows this place inside and out. We wouldn't be where we are without her. The words felt genuine, and they weren't the type of empty praise I was used to hearing. It felt like recognition for the hard work I had put in all these years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly appreciated. But with each compliment, there was a subtle shift in the air. He began to confide in me more, as though he valued my opinion not just for work, but for personal matters too. During lunch breaks, he'd sit with me in my office, discussing everything from his childhood to his past career choices. I had always been a good listener, one of my strengths, I suppose, but I didn't expect to become someone's sounding board, especially not someone in a position of power. Yet, the more he opened up, the more I felt I could trust him. It felt good, in a way, to finally have someone take the time to truly listen. It wasn't just the professional respect that made me start trusting him, though. It was the small moments, the quiet conversations that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. He would bring me coffee from the cafe downstairs on mornings when I had early meetings, or offer to stay late to help me finish a complicated report. "You've done so much for this company, Alice," he told me one afternoon as we were both working late. "I don't know what I would have done without you. I truly need you here. I can't handle this alone." His words hit me in a way I didn't expect. Sure, I had been indispensable in the past, but hearing it from Ethan, a man with so much ambition and drive, made me feel like my experience mattered, like I still had a role to play in the future of the company. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of pride that wasn't just tied to the work itself, but to the respect I was receiving. It was like I was finally being recognized for all the years I had spent behind the scenes, making sure the numbers added up, ensuring the firm ran smoothly. It was at that point that I started to drop my guard. Slowly, I began to rely on him more. I let myself feel a little more comfortable, a little more open. I trusted Ethan. I believed that he saw me as an asset, someone who had something valuable to offer. It felt good to be seen that way, especially after so many years of doing the same thing, day in and day out, without any acknowledgement. But what I didn't realize then was that trust, real trust, was a dangerous thing. I had begun to let my guard down, and little by little, Ethan had wormed his way into my confidence. He knew I was loyal, and that's exactly what made me vulnerable. The more he spoke about how much he valued my expertise, the more I believed him. I thought he genuinely needed me. It wasn't just the compliments that were building up. It was the way he made me feel important, like I was integral to the company's future. In return, I started helping him more, offering my insights into strategies, guiding him through the complexities of financial reports, and even attending meetings where I typically wouldn't have been involved. He knew exactly how to play the game, and I, for all my years of experience, didn't see it coming. It wasn't long before things started to take a more serious turn, and that's when Ethan pulled me in deeper. It began with a casual request one morning. At least, that's how it seemed at first. "Alice," he said, walking into my office with a file in his hand, "I need your help with something. It's a time-sensitive transaction, and I trust you to handle it." I looked up from the papers I was reviewing, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. Ethan had been keeping me busy lately with smaller tasks. But this felt different. "What's the transaction?" I asked, trying to read his expression. He smiled reassuringly. "Nothing too complicated, I promise. Just some documents that need to be signed for an acquisition. It's all legit, nothing out of the ordinary." His voice was calm, steady, and the fact that he was asking me, someone who had been with the company for nearly 3 decades, only reinforced the sense of trust I had built in him. He knew how much I valued my reputation, how careful I was with every financial decision, and I genuinely believed he needed my expertise to navigate this acquisition. I had been there long enough to know that sometimes things needed to be handled discreetly to keep momentum going, especially when a deal was crucial to the company's future. I didn't question it. He handed me the documents, a thick stack of papers that looked like they were part of some major transaction. They were full of legal jargon and financial clauses. I didn't have the time to review thoroughly at that moment, but Ethan seemed confident. And honestly, I trusted him. I'd known him long enough now to believe he had the company's best interest at heart. "It'll just take a minute," he said with a smile, leaning in a little too close. "Just sign at the bottom of each page. I've already looked over everything with the legal team, so we're good to go." There was no reason to think twice. I signed. I trusted him. I even thought it was a little flattering, in a way, that he would trust me with such an important task. A few weeks passed, and everything seemed fine. The acquisition went through, and the company's financials appeared stable, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was a tension in the office that hadn't been there before. I tried to push it aside, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Then came the day that everything unraveled. It was a Monday morning when I received an email from the company's external auditors requesting an urgent meeting. I felt a chill creep up my spine. It wasn't unusual for auditors to come in for routine checks, but this request felt too sudden. Something wasn't right. When I walked into the conference room for the meeting, I was greeted by Ethan and the auditors, along with the company's legal counsel. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't until I sat down that I fully realized what was happening. "Ethan," one of the auditors began, flipping through some papers, "there's something wrong with the financials. We've found discrepancies, missing funds, incorrect invoices, and a significant shortfall. It looks like these errors were signed off by Alice." My heart sank. I could barely process the words. Discrepancies, missing funds. I had been the one overseeing the financial reports, the one ensuring every penny was accounted for. I had always been meticulous. The idea that something could have gone wrong on my watch was unthinkable. But what was even more horrifying was the fact that the auditors were pointing fingers directly at me. I turned to Ethan, searching his face for any sign of understanding, any hint that he would come to my defense. But his expression was unreadable. His lips were tight, his gaze unwavering. He simply nodded toward the auditors as though everything was business as usual. "I didn't know about any of this," he said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "Alice has always handled the finances. I'm afraid I'm just as surprised as you are." A wave of shock and betrayal hit me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. He wasn't backing me up. He wasn't offering any kind of explanation. He was throwing me under the bus, and I was powerless to stop it. The meeting went on for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. They showed me documents, transactions that were fake, invoices that had never been processed, accounts that didn't exist, and at the bottom of each one, my signature. I was stunned. How had this happened? How could I have missed something so glaring? But deep down, I knew it wasn't me. It couldn't have been. I had always been diligent, always been the reliable one. And yet, the evidence was there. The accusations were clear. They told me that they would conduct a full investigation, but the damage had already been done. The legal department would be involved, and I was to be suspended until further notice. Ethan, still standing there, said nothing more. He didn't look at me. He didn't even seem to care. He simply turned away, as if I was no longer a part of the equation. In that moment, I realized what had happened. I had been set up. He had manipulated me, used my trust, and framed me for something I didn't do. The thought made me feel sick, but it also ignited something in me, something cold and sharp. I wasn't going down like this. I wasn't given much time to process the storm that had hit my life. The following days were a blur of meetings with lawyers, endless phone calls, and a sense of betrayal that ran so deep I could barely bring myself to look anyone in the eye. My colleagues, the people I had worked alongside for years, turned their backs without a word of defense. Some, like Jennifer from HR, sent me sympathetic glances but never once stepped up to speak in my favor. Others, like Tom from accounting, whispered behind my back, avoiding me when I tried to explain my side. The whispers began to spread through the office like wildfire. "Did you hear about Alice?" I overheard one of the assistants say. "I thought she was one of the good ones. Guess we were wrong." There was no one left in my corner, no one except Ethan. But the man I had trusted, the one I had helped climb to the top, had thrown me away as if I were nothing more than a liability. He was nowhere to be found, not even a phone call to check on me. His silence spoke volumes. The realization hit me hard. I was alone in this. The worst part? The worst part was the public humiliation. The firing was bad enough, but the way the company handled it made it worse. They made sure everyone knew. The internal memo went out immediately, and by lunchtime, half of the office had received an email stating that I was under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and financial mismanagement. It wasn't just a firing, it was a full-on character assassination. I was devastated, but I was also angry. No one bothered to ask me what happened. No one cared to hear my side of the story. I was just another scapegoat, a convenient target to deflect attention from someone else's mistakes. And that's when the legal threats started. The company's legal team sent me a letter demanding restitution. They claimed that I had knowingly participated in a fraudulent scheme and that I would be held liable for the missing funds. They even had the audacity to threaten me with criminal charges. The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. They weren't just ruining my career, they were threatening to ruin my life. I had no savings to speak of, and the thought of facing criminal charges was terrifying. The pressure was crushing, and the weight of it all settled heavily on my chest. I didn't know where to turn, but I knew I couldn't just give up. I couldn't let Ethan and the company win. I spent hours each day pacing my apartment, racking my brain for a solution. I felt utterly lost, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was in those moments of despair that I knew I had to fight back. The first step was contacting a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in corporate fraud and wrongful termination. I needed someone who could help me navigate the legal mess I was caught in. After a few consultations, I found someone I trusted, Catherine Mallory, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who had a reputation for going after big companies. She didn't take no for an answer, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. "Catherine, I need your help," I told her on the phone, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I had been through. "I didn't do this, but they're framing me, and I need to clear my name." She listened carefully, her tone calm but determined. "I believe you, Alice. We'll get to the bottom of this. But it's going to take time, and it's going to be a fight." That fight started with gathering evidence. I couldn't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix this. I needed to take matters into my own hands. Catherine suggested we hire a private investigator to go over the documents and emails I had worked with in the weeks leading up to my termination. We needed to find something, anything, that could prove my innocence. In the meantime, I spent hours at my old office, accessing what I could from the company's server. They had locked me out of most of the systems, but I still had my access to a few accounts, including email. It was in those emails that I started to uncover the truth. Emails between Ethan and the legal team. Emails that referenced the very transactions I had signed off on. Some of them were buried in chains of communication, but others were more direct. The signatures on the documents were mine, yes, but the directions to sign them came from Ethan, with careful instructions to push through the transactions without too much scrutiny. The fraud wasn't mine, it was his. As I pored over the emails, I found one particular message, dated just a week before the auditors began their investigation. In it, Ethan had written to a third-party vendor, thanking them for their cooperation and instructing them to send over the final invoices in a specific manner that would cover up the discrepancies. It was damning. It wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a deliberate attempt to manipulate the company's financials, and I had been the unwitting pawn in his game. I had been used as a shield to cover his tracks. With the help of Catherine and the investigator, we began to piece together the full scope of Ethan's scheme, his charming persona, his flirtations, and the way he had drawn me in. It had all been part of the plan. He needed someone who was trusted, someone who had the credibility and experience to sign off on documents without question. He had built me up only to tear me down, making me the scapegoat for his crimes. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The legal team was assembling the evidence we had gathered, and we were preparing for trial. I wasn't just going to clear my name, I was going to make sure Ethan paid for what he had done. The battle was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the situation pressed down harder. Each day, I woke up to the same relentless thought. I had to fight. If I didn't, they would win. If I didn't push back now, I would never be able to hold my head high again. I spent every waking moment working with Catherine and the private investigator, uncovering more of Ethan's lies. It was exhausting. There were times when I felt like giving up, when the pressure and the constant threat of financial ruin were so overwhelming that it felt like I was suffocating. But I kept pushing. I kept digging. Catherine was a godsend. Every time I felt like the walls were closing in, she reminded me that we were on the right path. She was a true professional, confident and methodical, yet compassionate in a way that made me feel heard, understood. She understood what was at stake, not just my reputation, but my entire life. "Don't worry, Alice," she would say during our meetings. "We have everything we need. We're not just going to clear your name. We're going to make sure Ethan pays for what he did. Trust me." But trusting wasn't easy. Trusting people had led me to this point in the first place. Ethan had been charming and manipulative, a master of deceit. The thought of putting my faith in someone again was terrifying. But Catherine was different. She was my ally, my only ally. I spent hours combing through old files and emails. The investigator we hired worked tirelessly, interviewing former employees who had been around when Ethan first arrived. We started to build a picture of his behavior, how he had systematically moved money around, manipulated financial reports, and used his position to deceive everyone. But it wasn't just the company he had scammed. He had been playing a much larger game, and I had been his unwitting accomplice. At first, I was angry. I had trusted him. He had seduced me with flattery, making me feel valued when I had spent years watching others around me get promotions I deserved. His attentions had made me feel seen, appreciated, something I hadn't felt in a long time. But that was all a lie. He had never cared for me. He had only cared about using me to further his own schemes. I found a particular email exchange that hit me hardest. It was a chain between Ethan and a financial consultant who had helped him cover up some of the irregularities in the accounts. The email was clear. Ethan had been planning this for months, setting up a web of fraudulent transactions that, if they were not properly audited, would go unnoticed. I had been the one to approve many of these transactions, believing them to be legitimate, trusting that everything was above board. I had signed them off without hesitation, following the procedures as I always had. But what I didn't know was that Ethan had ensured the paperwork was padded with false information, creating a smokescreen that would later point to me when things went wrong. As I read those emails, I could feel the anger rising in me, hot and heavy. How could I have been so blind? How had I let him pull the wool over my eyes for so long? But the more I dug, the more I realized that the story wasn't just about me. It was about a man who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder by manipulating, deceiving, and betraying everyone around him. He wasn't just some charming director. He was a con artist, and I had been his biggest victim. There were moments when I was overwhelmed with the weight of it all. The legal threats, the loss of my career, the shame of being fired for something I hadn't done. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if I could even win, if this battle was worth it. But I always came back to one thing. I couldn't let him get away with it. I couldn't let him walk away with his life intact while I was left with nothing. With Catherine's help, we began preparing for trial. It wasn't going to be easy. Ethan had powerful allies, connections in the company's legal department, and a team of high-priced lawyers who would stop at nothing to protect him. But we had one thing that they didn't: the truth. We also had the emails, the documents, the records. They were the smoking gun, the proof that Ethan had orchestrated the entire scheme, using me as his scapegoat. Catherine was confident that we could win, but she warned me that it wouldn't be an easy fight. The corporate world was ruthless, and people like Ethan rarely faced real consequences. But that didn't matter to me anymore. I was in it for the long haul. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal motions, depositions, and sleepless nights. Catherine and I worked tirelessly to piece together every detail of Ethan's fraud. Every email, every phone call, every transaction, nothing was left unexamined. And then, finally, we were ready. We had everything we needed to take him down. But I wasn't prepared for how much it would cost me emotionally. There were moments in court when I felt like I might break. I had to sit across from Ethan, his smug smile never leaving his face as he tried to deny everything. He tried to paint me as the guilty party, as if I had been the mastermind all along. The audacity, the lies. I wanted to shout, to scream at him, to let everyone know what he had done. But I stayed silent. I couldn't afford to lose my composure. Not now. I knew that the final showdown was coming, and I was ready. The day of the verdict arrived, and my heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. Catherine and I had done everything we could to expose Ethan's lies, but as I sat in the courtroom, watching the judge prepare to deliver his decision, I felt a rush of uncertainty. Despite all the evidence, all the documents, the emails, and the interviews, I couldn't shake the fear that he would get away with it, that somehow someone with his connections, his charm, and his lies would slip through the cracks, just like he always had. But then the judge spoke. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the court finds the defendant, Ethan Marshall, guilty of financial fraud and corporate misconduct. The defendant is hereby ordered to pay restitution to the affected parties and will face a sentence of 5 years in prison, effective immediately. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. I had expected something, maybe a fine, maybe a slap on the wrist. But this was real. This was justice. Ethan's face, which had remained impassive through the trial, cracked as soon as the judge's words hit him. His eyes widened, his mouth dropped open, and for the first time in months, I saw him lose control. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. He had played me for a fool, made me the scapegoat, destroyed my life, and now, finally, he was going to pay. The courtroom was silent, save for the murmurs of the spectators and the shuffle of papers. I turned to look at Catherine, who was standing beside me. She gave me a small, reassuring smile. "You did it," she whispered. "You won." It didn't feel real. After everything, all the pain, the heartache, the doubt, I had won. It wasn't just about clearing my name, either. It was about taking back my dignity, my confidence, and my future. Ethan's lawyers tried to appeal the verdict, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. They had no more tricks up their sleeves. He was convicted, and his empire of lies began to crumble. Within weeks, his company filed for bankruptcy, and he lost everything. His reputation, his position, his wealth, gone. His once shiny career was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. But the most satisfying part? Watching his face as he was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He was no longer the untouchable golden boy. He was just a man facing the consequences of his actions. As for me, I was finally free. I was cleared of all charges, and the company issued a public apology. But the damage had already been done. My reputation had been restored, but I wasn't interested in returning to a life I'd left behind. The corporate world wasn't for me anymore. I had lost too much. My trust in people, in systems, had been shattered. It was time to start over. I had spent decades building someone else's empire. Now it was time to build my own. A few weeks after the trial, I received a call from a former colleague who had been following my case closely. She had left the company shortly after I was fired and had been in touch with a financial firm that was looking for someone with my expertise. They were offering me a position, one that would allow me to work independently, from home, on my own terms. It wasn't as glamorous as my previous job, but it was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild. I didn't hesitate. I took the job, and within months, I was thriving. I built a small financial consulting business, helping small businesses and individuals manage their finances. It wasn't the high-powered corporate world I had once been a part of, but it was honest work. I had my integrity back, and that meant more to me than any fancy office or title ever could. My new life wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But then I'd look out the window of my small but cozy home office, see the sunlight pouring in, and realize that I was finally in control of my own future. I didn't need to answer to anyone. I wasn't a pawn in someone else's game anymore.